deception, brutality, and an iron grip on power. These are the hallmarks of one of the most controversial figures in modern political history. Desi Bouterse is a name that echoes across Suriname and the world, conjuring memories of coups, massacres, and unrelenting control. Yet his story is more than just one of power. It's a tale of betrayal, survival, and an unshakable hold on a nation's fate. Today, we dive deep into the life of Desi Bouterse, a man who rose from relative obscurity to dominate Surinamese politics for decades. You may know him as a former president, a convicted drug trafficker, or even as the orchestrator of the infamous December murders. But the truth about his rise to power and the lasting impact of his rule is far more sinister and far more complex. Be warned. This is not an easy story to hear. It's a tale of ambition, violence, and the chilling lengths to which a leader will go to secure his legacy. This is the dark, untold story of Desi Bouterse. As we peel back the layers of his life, we'll explore the events that turned a young military officer into a feared dictator. From orchestrating bloody coups to securing a presidency shadowed by corruption and fear, Bouterse's actions have shaped the fate of an entire nation. But how does a man with such a dark history maintain power for decades? How did Suriname, scarred by colonialism and struggling for its place in the world, become a stage for one of the most controversial regimes in modern history? This story spans decades, weaving through the horrors of political violence, international drug smuggling, and the fragile hopes of a nation. Stay with us as we uncover the secrets and confront the legacy of a man whose name is etched into the darkest chapters of Suriname's history. This is the disturbing true story of Desi Bouterse. Beneath the lush canopy of Suriname's rainforests lies a nation burdened by its colonial past and fragile independence. It was in this setting, amidst political turmoil and economic uncertainty, that Desi Bouterse emerged, not as a hero of democracy, but as a military officer whose ambition would shape his country's darkest chapters. Born on October 13, 1945, in the small village of Domburg, Bouterse grew up in a society fractured by colonial exploitation. Like many young men of his time, he joined the military in search of opportunity. But Suriname in the 1970s was far from stable. Political infighting and economic stagnation had left the population disillusioned, setting the stage for Bouterse's dramatic rise to power. In the early hours of February 25, 1980, Suriname awoke to gunfire and a chilling announcement on the radio. The sergeant's coup, led by Bouterse and 15 other officers, had overthrown the government of Prime Minister Henk Aaron. Promising to end corruption and restore stability, Bouterse quickly consolidated power. By dismantling democratic institutions, silencing the press, and outlawing political opposition, he transformed Suriname into a military dictatorship with himself at the helm. At first, many hoped Bouterse would deliver on his promises of reform, but his regime soon revealed its true face. In December 1982, paranoia about dissent culminated in the December murders, when 15 prominent critics of the regime were tortured and executed at Fort Zeelandia. Families of the victims were left shattered, while survivors described the horror of screams echoing through the fort's stone walls. This atrocity cemented Bouterse's rule through fear, and dissent was crushed under the weight of his growing authoritarianism. Even as the international community condemned the killings, Bouterse's ambitions grew. By the mid-1980s, he had turned Suriname into a hub for cocaine trafficking, forging alliances with South American cartels. The profits flowed into his regime, sustaining his power and deepening the corruption that plagued the nation. How does a man rise from obscurity to become the architect of a nation's darkest days? Desi Bouterse's ascent was built on promises of change, but delivered terror and corruption. His grip on power tightened, leaving a nation fractured and fearful. But this was only the beginning of Bouterse's legacy. As we delve deeper, we uncover the lengths he would go to maintain control and the shadows he cast over Suriname for decades to come. By the mid-1980s, Desi Bouterse's grip on Suriname was absolute. Having silenced opposition and dismantled democracy, he ruled not with promises, but with fear. Yet, maintaining power came at a cost. Isolated by international sanctions and faced with a collapsing economy, Bouterse turned to the shadowy underworld of corruption and crime to sustain his regime. Suriname, already weakened by political instability, became a hub for the cocaine trade, with Bouterse at the center of an international network of smugglers. Cartels funneled drugs through Suriname en route to Europe and the US, enriching his regime and securing loyalty from his military allies. This illicit economy allowed Bouterse to fund his dictatorship, even as his people suffered under worsening economic conditions. But his growing paranoia soon spilled into brutal violence. In 1986, during the Surinamese interior war, Bouterse ordered the Moiwana massacre, where soldiers attacked a Maroon village, killing over 40 civilians, including women and children. The massacre, justified as an operation against rebels led by Ronnie Brunswick, sent shockwaves through the nation. Survivors fled into the jungle, and Moiwana became a haunting symbol of Bouterse's ruthlessness. While the international community condemned his actions, Bouterse showed no remorse. His ties to the cocaine trade deepened, and in 1999, a Dutch court convicted him in absentia for drug trafficking. Though Suriname's lack of an extradition treaty shielded him from arrest, the conviction marked the beginning of his international isolation. Despite these cracks in his regime, Bouterse reinvented himself in the 2000s as a populist politician. Through the National Democratic Party, NDP, he returned to power in 2010, this time as president, promising unity and prosperity. But the ghosts of his past, the December murders, the Moiwana massacre, and his role in the cocaine trade, haunted his presidency, dividing the nation. Desi Bouterse's story is one of power built on fear, sustained by corruption, and marked by relentless ambition. As his rule entered its final chapters, it became clear that no legacy, no matter how strong, can outrun the weight of history. Desi Bouterse was a man who defied the odds at every turn. From orchestrating coups to reshaping himself as a populist leader, his career seemed impervious to the forces of justice. But even the most powerful figures cannot escape the consequences of their actions forever. As the years went by, the shadows of Bouterse's past grew longer, and his grip on Suriname began to weaken. By the late 2010s, Bouterse's image as a strongman started to crumble. While he remained president until 2020, cracks in his regime were undeniable. Suriname's economy, burdened by corruption and mismanagement, plunged deeper into crisis. Public discontent grew louder, and even those who once supported him began to question whether his rule had truly benefited the nation. Yet it wasn't economic hardship that would finally bring Bouterse to justice. It was his darkest crime, the December murders, that came back to haunt him. In November 2019, a Surinamese court convicted him for his role in the killings, sentencing him to 20 years in prison. It was a moment of catharsis for many families of the victims who had waited nearly 40 years for justice. But for others, it felt hollow. Bouterse, still in power, showed no intention of stepping down or serving his sentence. He dismissed the conviction as politically motivated, a desperate attempt to undermine his leadership. Then came the 2020 general elections, a turning point in Suriname's history. Facing widespread dissatisfaction, Bouterse and his National Democratic Party were defeated by Chandrikaprasad Chan Santoki, a former police chief and political rival. For the first time in decades, Bouterse was no longer at the helm of the nation he had controlled for so long. Out of power and increasingly isolated, Bouterse's health began to decline. The man who once dominated Suriname with an iron fist now lived in the shadow of his own legacy. While he remained active in politics, his influence waned, and his legal troubles loomed larger than ever. Calls for his arrest and imprisonment grew louder, and his once loyal supporters began to distance themselves. On December 23, 2024, Desi Bouterse passed away in his home in Paramaribo at the age of 79. Official reports cited complications from a long-term illness, though the exact details remain unclear. His death marked the end of an era in Suriname, a chapter defined by fear, violence, and political maneuvering. In death, as in life, Bouterse remains a divisive figure. To some, he is remembered as a patriot who sought to strengthen Suriname in its most fragile years. To others, he is a symbol of unchecked power, responsible for the deaths of innocent civilians and the corruption of a nation's soul. His legacy leaves a nation grappling with the scars of his rule, as Suriname continues its journey toward healing and democracy. Desi Bouterse's story is a chilling reminder of the cost of absolute power and the lengths to which some will go to maintain it. While his life has ended, the consequences of his actions will be felt for generations to come. The atrocities committed under his watch, the lives lost, and the divisions created remain etched into the fabric of Suriname's history. This was the disturbing true story of Desi Bouterse, a man whose name will forever be associated with power, paranoia, and the unrelenting pursuit of control.